God bless. God, I didn't say that very spiritedly. This is Mark Anthony DeBello, and this is NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL-ESP.com or NFL Extended Strategic Principles. I apologize for the late airing of this broadcast. This is sort of a bye week for me personally, and also, quite honestly, something of a burnout week. It's amazing how spiritually my football prowess, if I do have any, and football life parallels that of my friend and brother, Coach Trestman and his Chicago Bears. Coach and I just communicated yesterday at length, and regrettably, the Bears are not going to be adapting much more of the NFL ESP system for their final second half of the season. And I much fear, as I wrote to Coach, without again revealing too much because of our confidential relationship based on ministerial factors and just a common bond and trust we have, that the Bears game against the Packers coming up in Week 10 is going to determine whether their season is 7-9 or 8-8. So I wanted to give Coach some strategies on how to be more productive in that game, make more basic strategy, aggressive decisions, and defeat or upset, as it were, the Pack, so that the Bears could get to 8-8 and then have a sort of final place scenario as they did last year, not against the Pack in Week 17, but against the Lions. But again, how the main note that I made was to use a game plan similar to that Washington used last week in Week 8 to defeat or upset as 8, I think, point power spread underdogs to Dallas and affect the play by quote-unquote knocking out Tony Romo, and that the way they affected Aaron Rodgers this game physically and mentally and with his play would affect Aaron Rodgers throughout the rest of the season. And when to defeat the Packers, you in a way need to defeat Aaron Rodgers. So having said that, did speak at length with Coach, still love him, and anyway, so suffering some technical difficulties this week, and we'll have this broadcast, again, limited to a half an hour. The second half of the program will cover the investment side of football for those of you who have an interest in such. We'll recap some of last week, Week 8, briefly, and give some picks and prognostication. But again, the NFL ESP program is really about helping a team and a coach with basic strategy decisions, and we cover it from the spiritual perspective, the motivational perspective, the X's and O's or play design perspective, and then certainly with use of the power spread. A couple of commentary notes. Broadcasting this on Sunday morning before the airing of the games. Saw the, I guess, something of a protest about the name Redskins for the Washington Redskins, and want to make a couple quick social commentaries here. I did post on my Facebook page something about gay athletes, caused quite an uproar. So I stand by the beliefs that God has on such matters, and don't believe I am judgmental. There's a Supreme Court. There's judges there. The judges ran Israel, and Jesus will judge every human being. It's not my place to condemn anybody because Jesus does not, but sin is sin, and that's the way it is. And we are all sinners and fall short of the glory of God, just as I. And I can only hope and pray that people learn on how God thinks and how God judges, his thoughts on sin and adultery. So having said that, I also see that there's a protest outside one of the stadiums. I don't know if it's Washington or where, but regarding the name Redskins. I don't want to go into length on my commentary on that, but I will say that the issues Native Americans are having with the name Redskins, I worked in a Native American organization once, quite a large one actually, quite a prominent one in the U.S. These days. I actually worked as a card dealer, not car, at a Native American casino reservation. And I was sort of the token Native American there, in the sense I was Italian. I was there at its startup. There wasn't a lot of Native Americans on the staff. There wasn't a lot in the hierarchy of the executives. But what I did learn there was that Native Americans do not, and this is going to relate to how much of an issue the Redskins or Washington team has with the name, and if it does get changed or the petition to get it changed, is that I was informed that from a few actual Native Americans who were there on the site that Native Americans take even offense to the name Indians. So I'm quite certain, although I really haven't heard it out there in the media, that if the Redskin name is changed, then certainly at some point someone will take issue, or Native Americans will take issue with the name, quote-unquote, Indians, that I was told was defamatory and derogatory toward Native Americans, and perhaps down the line Braves and such. So, again, I don't want to make more comment than that, only to say that as a, I guess, quote-unquote, prediction that if the Redskin name is changed, then I anticipate ultimately at some point the name Indians, for let's say the Cleveland Indians, will be changed. I want to make a note in relation to the weather that I saw, and this is probably more as it relates to, again, I can relate it to NFL ESP, and we'll make a quick note on that, but to the second half of the program and those who invest in games. I saw amazingly already snowy weather in New England for the game against the Patriots and the Broncos, who are visiting New England. Snow, here's how weather usually affects a game. Not so much the rain as much as the wind. Wind affects the passing game, the special teams game, and usually the windier or the more wind at a game, the lower the scoring. So from an NFL ESP perspective, coaches need to be aware of that and kind of adjust their basic strategy decisions. For example, a typical NFL game used to be over the last 15 years when I refined the NFL ESP system, basically a 21-21 game. Of course, we know it can't end in a tie, but statistically about 21-21, 42 total points, and each team gaining 300 yards. Now the average is about 24-21 or 45 points, and thus one team would gain about 350 yards and another team 300 yards. So when you go into a game with a mindset of a 50% probability to win that game, when you look at the box score or assess some of the basic statistics, the most basic statistic apart from the score would be the total yardage. So that's keeping that in mind. You want to adjust your basic strategy decisions, or a coach would, to the projected amount of points in a game. Higher scoring game, if you have a better offense, you want to run more plays. If you're the underdog, quote unquote, or the power spread underdog, which we know is the more actual number than that which is publicized, and let's say you have a weaker offense or a weak defense and you want to, quote unquote, protect your defense, you want to slow down the game. You want to use up the possession clock. Yes, every coach would love to have a drive that is, a 15-play, 80-yard drive, but the point is to use up the play clock and sort of shorten the game if you're the underdog, and hurry up the game and run more plays if you're the favorite. And the bigger the favorite, the more plays, and the bigger the underdog, the less plays. So, again, wind is the basic number one factor with regards to weather. But as I mentioned, in Foxborough this week, week 9, is snow. What people don't realize is snow, and here's, again, what the data shows. Snow typically, believe it or not, leads to an over game, a higher scoring game. The reason for this is it's the footing. It's all about the footing. Snow usually affects the footing, and players slip on the defense. They have to react, and you're much more effective as a receiver or an offensive player than you are a defensive player who's on quote-unquote skates or sliding around the field. So typically, while most people think, and especially from an investment standpoint, that if there's more snow or weather like that, or even rain, which can make some fields slick, you would think it'd be under. But no, typically, believe it or not, especially snow, again, in a slick surface, the games go over because of, the inability of the defensive backs, especially on cutting routes and deeper routes, actually, believe it or not, as long as your quarterback is decently armed and can throw, and or strong-armed and can throw, is the difficulty in covering receivers from the defensive back position. So, anyway, having said that, we're about 11 and a half minutes into the program. Again, not had a less than stellar week last week with the prognostications. I'm sad to announce that one of the blog partners I was airing on, if you will, are posting some information called Sidelines, Sidelines, who has a deal with ESPN, who's a Disney-owned company, took great offense, and in one way I don't blame them, to an article I posted on gay athletes that I had posted before and was sort of had it, well, it was actually rejected after being posted on a website called Fan Nation. So people take great offense. That's the sort of the big social movement these days, is to allow same-sex marriage, and that homosexuality is somehow to be accepted. And so my basically disagreeing with that based on the way God feels and thinks, and certainly what biblical scripture says. And although, and again, I posted on my personal Facebook page, and you can find that at Facebook.com/Mark DeBello, just as you can find any information on myself at MarkAnthonyDeBello.com, and again, this program at NFLESP.com. Made a commentary. I, believe what God believes, or try to, and that's, the judge whom I have to face. So I make no apologies. I do apologize that I know Sidelines wasn't actually the forum, although every place is the forum for God. But I kind of knew deep in my heart that I might get rejected from them. I simply wanted to see what I could, how far to the edge, if you will, I could go in posting spiritual sports beliefs and not just sports opinion, which in the end, how anything doesn't equate to God, everything should equate to God, put it that way. So anyway, having said that, regrettably, Sidelines won't allow me to make one mistake, retract the article, and then just write simple sports-minded opinions. So God forgive them, and again, I've worked with that company in the past, and I sort of know in my heart their social thoughts and consciousness, and God bless and forgive them. So I'm not, that sort of derailed me, if you will, with regards to having a fervor to want to get my thoughts down timely here on this recording. But nonetheless, it's still all about football this week. Week 8, in the next 30 seconds here before we go to thoughts and feelings on Week 9, stumbled a few places, thinking a little too much like the quote-unquote public, like most people think. You can't think that way. You have to think like God thinks, and then you have to sort of think, if you want to invest, the way the quote-unquote house thinks, because they're in it to win it. And the number that they post, as far as their version of the original number, which is the power spread, is again manipulated and designed to, I'll use the word tempt, if you will, people into investing in the losing team. So you really kind of have to, be aware of that. So we're halfway through the program, so with a quick recap here and then going into the upcoming week. Week 9 saw the Lions come back to defeat the Falcons. We figured that game was close. Lions win straight up. Falcons win with the power spread. We had Minnesota over Tampa, won that one in overtime. That was a projection we made. I thought the Bears might keep it close. Again, probably biased, but again, not surprised that the Patriots did win. Did note that only because the Bears, that division is having a hard time, at least the Bears, defeating the AFC East. This we were wrong. Thought the Rams would keep it close against the Chiefs. They did not. Didn't really review any of the box scores or post games this week, so I don't know all the turnover and yardage data since most games are decided by turnovers. So, again, at least from the investment perspective, since most coaches simply use basic strategy and don't use the power spread or implement it into their basic strategy decisions. The Bills and the Jets, we thought the Jets might keep it close, had one of our partners believe very much in the Jets. I think that skewed my mindset, to be honest. But the Jets, again, are a very insufficient team with their current quarterback situation, or at least what it was with their starting quarterback, and the Bills ran through that number. Jacksonville, again, the most inept team, I believe, actually probably as bad as, again, I rank them a little lower than the Raiders. But the Dolphins ran through that number. Houston got Clowney back. Mentioned that in Week 7, how we thought that would really affect them, and it did, and that helped them to beat the Titans. The Ravens and Bengals noted at great length how we thought the Ravens, and that by the end of the year the Ravens will be closer to winning the division title than the Bengals will be, and how power spread home field advantage this year has actually gone from usually a league-wide average of 3 points to 4 to 7 points, based a lot on the pass interference and defensive holding calls, or in this case not calling them. Cincinnati gets a huge home bias and basically won the game here on a call that was an interference call, offensive interference against Steve Smith Sr. on the near final play of the game. And I can only say this, that if that game were, and this is part of home field advantage and how coaches need to strategize, if that game were in Baltimore, that call wouldn't have been called. In Cincinnati, where it decides the game, most certainly that call is going to get called. That's what home field advantage ultimately is. It's the humanity of referees emotionally persuaded, or if you will, or influenced by crowd noise and just knowing that they're in Cincinnati and the effect that their decisions, their policing of a game will have on the outcome. So, and again, it's been very, very dramatic this year. Home teams are getting calls more so than I've ever seen, and those types of calls. And a lot of it had to do, again, with the rules on defensive holding and interference. It makes it a lot easier to make those quote-unquote or any judgmental calls, or judgment calls. And those judgment calls really do determine games. So that was certainly a game where Baltimore, I know, is power spread ranked higher than Cincinnati and should be, but again, those home calls. Philly and Arizona, we projected Arizona to defeat Philadelphia, and I think that was the result, to be honest with you. I don't even recall showing you. Again, I didn't research the box scores. Indianapolis against Pittsburgh, really thought Indy would, because of their data, do better, but that's the strength of having a home underdog on a national stage. Home teams, again, not just the officiating, but certainly play with a real motivational factor, especially on a nationally televised game. And Indianapolis, who was in a surplus, if you will, of about 500 yards in offense over their opponents' total yardage, came back to earth, if you will, a little bit. And there is, again, a bell curve to everything in statistical data, and Pittsburgh certainly played a stellar game in defeating Indianapolis, and there's the same sort of situation with that game this week, and we'll get to the Week 10 here in the next 9 minutes against the Giants this week. Same sort of scenario, I think. The Raiders played the Browns. That game was a little bit closer than I think the score indicated, and again, I cannot say it enough, and now again, as usual, I'm beginning to hear the media talk about it. What's this, week 8 after I projected that the Browns will do, again, you don't know. Maybe Johnny Manziel gets in there and doesn't do better, but I believe and have said this, proclaimed this from the beginning, that they would be doing much better, the Browns, better than their 4-3 record, and could win that division if they had Johnny Manziel in there from the start of the season, or at least after the bye week. The Packers played the Saints. The Saints, as we projected, one of our top plays, played like it was a must-win with the WANT, W-A-N-T, term I always use with coach. The team that wins is the team that wants to win, meaning human factors and emotion will beat talent every time. Call it the David and Goliath effect. But again, the Saints played their Super Bowl, if you will, and their must-win WANT game, and certainly looked good against the Packers. In a big upset, we knew that the Cowboys were going to be power spread ranked too high in this game. It had been building up, if you will, sort of a supply and demand surplus on that number, and it went as high as 10 in many places, and the Redskins ended up winning straight up. So no real surprise there, although the upset certainly was. All right, so we've got exactly 8 minutes to go here in Week 9. We, again, can't do the Thursday night game. That's come and gone, where the Saints defeated the Panthers. So in the first game, and again, right now I have to be honest, I have technical difficulties, so I don't know the line changes, but have an idea of where the public is thinking. The Dolphins are playing the Chargers. I think the public, I have some data that they're all investing in the Chargers at a spread of Miami minus, I think, about 2. Personally, my heart would want to say the Chargers, but this seems like a game that is going to end up being Miami. The house knows that, the quote-unquote house knows that. The public's going to be investing in San Diego. And I can tell you one, I'll call it a trick actually, a manipulation, if you will, of what the house does when you see a game open up as a 1-point difference. Typically, if it's power spread, well, again, they don't use the power spread. NFL ESP uses the power spread. They use another word quite similar to that, because they take that actual power spread number and, manipulate it enough so you invest, and then they publicize their number. And that number, again, is called a spread, but a different first word in front of that. But again, when you're a 1 point, when they post a spread, I'll just say spread of 1 point, they're typically expecting you to invest in the underdog, because you'll look there and you'll say, geez, this is a really good team. San Diego getting points, they shouldn't be an underdog. And you will, again, be manipulated to want to invest in San Diego. They could easily make San Diego a 1-point favorite. I mean, really, they could. And then you would look, and Miami fans would look, and they would say, hey, look, let's play Miami. They're getting 1 point. They're the underdog, the quote-unquote underdog. So, again, usually when you see a 1-point spread, you want to lean toward the favorite, okay? And that's manipulation that the house uses. The next game is Cincinnati against Jacksonville. Here's a case where I like Cincinnati all week, to be honest, even though, I downplay them a lot. But I know how weak Jacksonville is, and I know the home field advantage for Cincinnati, and I know that they're a better team than Jacksonville. If you were investing, I would stay away from this game, because typically a professional investor is probably going to end up taking Jacksonville. Cleveland and Tampa, here's a 6.5-point a spread underdog in Tampa. Again, that's another manipulation, because when they post a 6 or 6.5-point spread, they could easily post that spread 7. But the public, quote-unquote public, will say, hey, look, we're getting a touchdown. We can at least cover. when they post a 7-point spread. Or when they post a 6.5-point spread, you look to the favorite and say, listen, we can win by at least a touchdown. So you end up investing in the favorite, and not surprisingly, the underdog covers. That's the same with the 2.5-point spread. So again, when you see a spread open at 6 or 6.5, typically that means you should invest in the underdog. And again, I think this is one of those games where if Cleveland loses, it's to their benefit because maybe they'll get Johnny Manziel in there. So I would expect, although I know Cleveland is the better team than Tampa, and definitely, better than the touchdown Tampa, I wouldn't be surprised to see Tampa cover this game. Washington's playing Minnesota. Again, here's another -1 game, so I would lean toward Minnesota, even though RG3 is back. I like when a quarterback comes back into a lineup, but so does everybody else. And, again, so you would play on the factor that he's rusty. And, again, I would lean toward Minnesota in this game. Houston is playing Texas. This was a game, again, that opened at -2.5, and I know the public is investing in Philadelphia. So I would certainly invest in Houston in this game. The Jets have a new quarterback in there, Mike Vick, and I don't believe power spread-wise you could do much worse than the existing quarterback they had in there. So I have to believe, even though Kansas City is certainly the better team, that power spread of 9.5 points is a lot of points to give the Jets, and with a new quarterback, you never know what he could do. So I would certainly invest in the Jets here. Arizona's playing Dallas. I'd loved Arizona all week with the power spread, and now that Tony Romo's out, I'm quite sure that spread's been adjusted. It had opened about Arizona getting 3.5 points, but I do, again, believe that the NFC West is better than the NFC East, and that the Cowboys certainly can't live up to their 7-1 start, no disrespect to them, and that the Cardinals will cover. Now with Brad Ween in there, I again believe the Cardinals will win now, but again, I believe it or not, don't actually know what the spread has moved to. But I suspect it probably moved to the Cardinals being favored by like 2.5, something like that. And then Tony Romo worth, in spread parlance, I guess, 6 points or so. Although I think he's a fantastic quarterback, and always thought he was a fantastic quarterback. So if I liked Arizona before, I have to certainly like Arizona now, and straight up to win that game. The Rams are playing the Niners. Usually teams flip-flop division opponents when they play one another, especially with regards to the investing in them. If you saw the Rams game, they played their heart out the first half against the Niners, the first time they played this season, but ended up losing. In rare circumstances, a team will sweep. And I think this is going to be one of those circumstances, because I believe that the Rams played their best that they could possibly play against the Niners the first game, and showed numerically and statistically that power spread-wise they didn't have enough to quote-unquote cover. So I think you're going to see San Francisco, even though the public I know is investing in San Francisco, may actually be able to run through, as I always say, the 10 points and still have enough to defeat the Rams. I wouldn't invest in them, no. I would always take the points in a second match divisional game, like a repeat, if you will, the second time around. But so with thoughts on both teams, I would stay away from the game. Denver's playing New England again. I think, and it projected at the beginning of the season, that this is going to be the AFC Championship game, and I think that if Denver wins this one, New England will win the next one. If New England wins this one, which I think they can easily stay with Denver, I have to reassess, but I wouldn't be disappointed, put it this way, if Denver defeated New England here, and then New England certainly went on to beat them in the AFC Championship, which, again, from the beginning of the season, what I had projected. Oakland, I think, is going to keep it close against Seattle, because Seattle is not a very clean team as I study them. Too many turnovers, penalties, missed kicks, things that they weren't doing last year. I know nobody's investing in Oakland, so if I had to, I would invest in Oakland. We've got a minute to go. We'll get this done here. We'd like the Ravens against the Steelers. That's the same sort of scenario as last week, though. But I still know the Ravens are the better team, but I'd be interested to see, at least power spread data-wise, what the Steelers do and the officiating that they get in a nationally televised game as a home, quote-unquote, dog. And it looks like people are investing in the Ravens, which is another downside to them, but I've got to stick with them. The Colts are playing the Giants. I know the Colts are getting the public investments here. The Giants, again, I think will do better once they get Ryan Nassib in there. and they're a home dog on a TV game. So because I like both sides, I would have to stay away from that game. So my heart says one thing, the data says something else. So listen, again, my apologies for the tardiness in airing this broadcast. This is Mark Anthony DeBello of markanthonydebello.com. This is NFL Moneyball, found at NFLESP.com.